Thank you for tuning in to this very special episode of Back to the City, just ahead of the release of the final record by MAETH, Wailing Village. We're going to take a journey through it, through the version of it performed at the Minnehaha Recording Company with the whole band. So, MAETH, I was pronouncing that correctly for how...
Yeah, or MAETH. We say MAETH, but we're also mispronouncing it. It's closer to Met.
Okay.
It's a mispronunciation of a weird transliteration of a Hebrew word.
Okay.
So, Met.
Okay,
Yeah.
which is relevant because the reason why this is the final record by the band is because you are going to become a rabbi.
Maybe, let's look too ahead of ourselves, but that's the idea. Yeah, I'm running away to try that, see what happens.
So you're the authority then on what the word Met means.
In this room, perhaps.
What does the word Met mean?
Death.
Death. Okay. So this is the fourth record by Met.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Has Death been an equally fitting name for the band all the way through the various manifestations? Would you say?
The name comes from the Yiddish story of the golem, in which Rabbi Lowe writes to bring the golem, which is like his clay creation, to life. He writes Emet, which means, I believe, truth, but it's also like a mystical name for God, or like invokes God on the golem's forehead, and that brings it to life. And then he erases the first letter to spell Met, which means death, to return it to just clay.
Interesting.
Not to be too sappy, but I do think like all of our music from the time that we started the band has this sort of sense of like building something and then like returning it. It kind of like builds something up and then deconstructs it or tries to resolve it in some way.
So musically, like the journey that we're on.
It's always felt like it means something different every time we work on new music, but it's always felt like an happening to me for what we were doing.
Yeah, you can always kind of feel it popping out of the final product, like, oh, it's part of the canon.
Yeah, we have a weird thing that we do. I think each of us has like our own weird like headcanon of like which order the albums go in, like because obviously we release them in an order and it like doesn't make any sense. But it's like I think what's kind of fun about that is like with what you said, like it kind of speaks to the fact that sometimes like albums that we wrote after another album feel like they actually came before the album that we wrote earlier.
In terms of the musical development, or in terms of telling a story, like and put together and then tell a narrative? Both. Or the latter.
Both.
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
The narrative arc of the lyrics on this song, they kind of deal with a child who has an experience seeing something that he can't really explain, something that seems miraculous.
Sure.
A woman who comes from the sea. For me, in the dream that he has later, her saying everything is an orchid, but I am shafts of light, is like everything that you see is like terrestrial. It's beautiful, it's this orchid, but I'm this like other thing that contrasts with that.
Yeah, I find that really interesting. Everything is this, but I, therefore not part of everything, am this other thing.
You just explained like most Jewish theology, by the way.
And also our
the concept of oneness in Jewish theology is really important. And it's like changed like so much throughout time, and like it morphed right from like the people talk about the like central kind of prayer of Judaism, and it's even talked about as like the central prayer of Judaism like in the writings of Jesus. So like it's seen as a central prayer of Christianity as well as Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, which means hear, O Israel, like Adonai is our God, and Adonai probably like best would have translated to Adonai alone. But like it usually now, and this sort of shows the shift in theology, means Adonai is one. And it's this idea that essentially like, and the way it gets elaborated is that God is one, and if God is one, God cannot be if God is indivisible. So if God is indivisible, like what are we? And aren't we then in some way sort of God? But there is yet this distance between us and whatever this concept of God is. And that is kind of like where Judaism lives, and for me,
Sure.
is in that space between like God is one, but we are separate from God, and how is that possible?
Yeah. Is the band kind of consciously exploring these kind of theological, kind of spiritual issues through that story?
We didn't talk much at any point about what it meant to us. I kind of wrote it out and brought it to the band. It was like, these are the lyrics, and this is kind of how I'm thinking of delivering them.
And this was once the music existed.
Yeah.
So the lyrics are the final thing, vocals final thing to be added.
Yeah, and then the other three members kind of made suggestions and edits, and then that's sort of how it turned out. It didn't change a whole lot. It had come out of some writing that I had done not related to the band. And this is funny because it's related to what Sam was just saying. But I knew I wanted to use it for something musical if I could because of that line, like, I am shafts of light. My favorite composer is Arvo Pärt. And Pärt describes the way he composes music as like there's an object and there's light, which is also really related to his practice of Christianity and him thinking of God illuminating objects and seeing it using that light.
Okay.
And so I was thinking about how like that line for me reminded me of like the way Hart makes music, and so I could just sort of like hear in my head how that little like flash fiction piece could like work over music.
I will say that's particularly poetic to hear, because we really don't talk about these things explicitly, but over the course of like the process of the last albums we made, there has been just this kind of recurring phenomenon of like, we don't really discuss beforehand or even afterwards sometimes what it is that we are trying to make the music, like what outside of it is supposed to gesture to. And the times we have talked about, it's like been like, whoa, that's very different, but also very similar to what was
in your mind,
in the imagination the whole time.
Well, that's what the purpose of this pre-tour conversation is.
Yeah, we're gonna have a lot to talk about afterwards.
Yeah, it's really awkward. It was like one of my favorite moments. One of my favorite moments we had in the studio. I can't remember which album this was. I think it was Oceans into Ashes. At one point we were like arguing about whether or not we should cut a track, and we were starting to have like be like, well, but like, and like the guy who was recording with us, Adam Tucker, like turned to us and was like, so is this a concept album? And two turned to him and went, yes, and the other two turned to him and went, no. So like,
is this a concept album?
Yes.
No.
I don't know if you remember this, David, but I remember that when we were first working on just like fragments of like MAETH music, like I remember we were writing like the riff for Wolves on acoustic guitar. One thing that we had been kicking back and forth was this idea of like albums that feel like they're concept albums and feel like concept albums to you, and you feel like you know they're concept albums, but you don't have any proof from the band, like this is the story.
Sure.
And I really, really like that. I really like that feeling. And so, in a sense, like, is it supposed to feel like a concept album, like, or is it supposed to feel like a narrative or cinematic like experience? Like, yes, but is it supposed to feel like a specific narrative or cinematic experience that we planned out? Like, no, you're supposed to kind of meet us halfway and fill in the gaps for yourself.
The decision to sort of set it in a whaling village kind of was tacked onto the rest of the narrative, and I think it works. It works for me because it is ostensibly a story about taking something beautiful from the sea and just letting it die. Because they take it to their church and it just dies in the sand. It can't live.
And this thing, which is the shafts of light, dies in the church once one puts it in the church. And that's interesting, like in the context of making the record, because the vocals are that adds up. Okay,
I hope they don't see this.
The vocals are done.
It's chill. It's fine. Yeah. No.
So that sounds great. Of course, it's very
cacophonous.
The main reason is for sonically,
Incredible natural reverb.
But is there a symbolic significance given that this mystical thing is brought to the church and dies, and then the record kind of comes to life in the church?
I really wish we could be that like heady post-metal band who like thought of this years in advance or was like, no, this is going to happen in a, like the story's in a church and we're going to record it in a church.
The rest of it was recorded in a whaling village, actually.
I actually wailed.
The actual truth is that like on previous MAETH records, we were always just dumping a bunch of studio reverb on the vocals, and Boone wanted to this time like just go to a place that was naturally, it had a ton of echo. Yeah. And your initial idea was like some urban exploring spots, right? Like drain pipes.
I even attempted to scout some urban exploring spots, like some drains specifically in the winter, and I couldn't get in because they were frozen. But yeah, you had just suggested the church.
Yeah, I was just like, would a church work? And you were like, yeah, a church would work. And I was like, okay, well, I grew up going to St. Mark's, really chill there. I'm sure they would let us like yell in the sanctuary, like when they're not, awesome. Having church there. Yeah, and
Thanks,
sure enough,
St. Mark's.
Yeah, sure enough, I hit up like friends of mine in the clergy who I've known since I was a child. And they were enthusiastic. They were like, that sounds great. Like, go for it.
So what was that experience like, of being in this place that has like meant so much to you and helped to...
It was surreal, because I grew up there. That was like part of like what raised me as a kid, was going to that church. And like a lot of my formative experiences were like being an acolyte there, like that's what Episcopals call an altar boy. It was like formative for me, and like as a kid, like that's what helped raise me, and that like helped form a lot of like my experiences of how to treat people and like what my religious beliefs were. And then to like kind of return with like my metal band was sweet.
What does it say about St. Mark's quickly that they were okay with like the metal band doing
it says that Episcopals are really chill. Like the classic thing when you ask like what's an Episcopal, there are a million kinds of Protestants in North America. Like what are Episcopals? Episcopals are people that are really liberal and open and inviting. Like half the clergy at St. Mark's is queer. It's in Loring Park. It's in like the heart of like the historic gay neighborhood, and like it's so like they're like super progressive politically, and like even like and they're all about feeding the poor, helping like the super progressive parts of Christianity, stuff that Jesus taught people to do, and that way too many Christians ignore. But along with that, they have like the really classic Catholic looking, like it has a hierarchy in place. You have the priests and you have the vicars and you have the acolytes, and it's all like very it feels like Catholic in that way, that there's just a lot of imagery going on, but it's none of the Catholic guilt. It's very it was
a really beautiful space. Yeah. Like I wasn't really sure what it was going to just look like and feel like inside, and it was like absolutely stunning. It was a cool place to spend a morning.
We did get a particularly good candid photo of that recording, and it's like, it's like the lighting, just the architecture, everything. It's just really cool.
We were in there at 9 a.m. on a Monday. Before like they had a choir concert that was happening at like 11 at 1 p.m. that we had to be done by. And so we got there early, like on a Monday morning, to record vocals.
And a little bit before the kids arrived, presumably. They might be disconcerting.
Yeah, we didn't. We wanted to be gone by the time people were like getting ready to, sit in the presence of God.
One of the people who goes to St. Mark's is Venus, who was playing at the Back to the City showcase.
Awesome.
At the end of this month.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I grew up, like, I never knew Venus really well. Like, as an adult, I, like, finally kind of introduced myself and was like, hi, I'm so-and-so. Like, we had mutual friends in the music scene. But, yeah, just growing up, she was just this, like, cool rock and roll figure at church that would show up once in a while. And I was like, she seems dope. She seems cool.
Venus is dope.
Yeah.
Confirmed.
Confirmed.
Okay, well, so far we've been, our conversation has been accompanied by some songs from the previous MAETH records, and we are now at this very moment about to embark on our journey through the three movements of Wailing Village, as performed at the Mini Haha Recording Company. So here we are at the beginning of movement 1. Everything is an orchid, and it begins with Steve playing the bells. So now I'm thinking of like the creation of like the golem.
You've got it.
Is that like an appropriate image?
There was a moment in the studio where we heard it for the first time, and we were like, that sounds like building a golem. That's good. I'm glad it came across.
Like with everything of this stuff is stuff that we talk about. It's sound first. Like everything is like we are like sitting together, like crafting, like how our parts interlock and all that stuff, and like we do not think about any of this stuff. It's just like it's just so fun that the imagery arises anyway.
But the sound first, the first sound is the bells. Why is the first sound the bells?
I really wish I could tell you that we were a really smart band that were like, oh, this is like about a church, like it's gonna.
That would have been so cool.
Right? But that's not true. That just sounded sweet.
I think we knew we wanted to start with, or we thought we wanted to start with the guitar line that David comes in with over the bells. And then we had a part from later in the song already written in which Steve plays a similar bell pattern. And so we thought, we were like, okay, let's take that bell pattern from later in the song and let's put something pretty close to it over this guitar part. And then as we were workshopping it more, I can't remember how it happened, but I think we just realized that it sounded better to us to have the bells begin the piece and then have the guitar come in underneath that.
Is the part of the movement where there is this guitar, is that waifu?
Excellent guess. It's waifu.
Can we turn the camera off, please? I gotta go.
We have some pretty unfortunate names for a lot of the riffs.
Working titles to help us remember the riffs. It's just like a way to lay out the music.
They helped you remember the riffs. I could never keep Progrosis and Frogrosis.
You know what we're talking about.
You have to understand that we are a DIY touring band, and what that means is we've spent a lot of time in small vans just cramped together with nobody to talk to but ourselves. So, the semantic concepts we sometimes express verbally may not be the most highbrow or even sensical.
Okay, I didn't expect that to happen. The response.
We didn't begin writing this song at the beginning.
We
We wrote from the middle toward the end, and then figured out the beginning.
The second movement is probably over 2 years old at this point.
Okay.
I think when we had written how the distorted second guitar and bass were going to come in over that guitar line, that's when we had this idea that this feels like a beginning of something. It feels like really melodramatic.
Oh, sure. So that was a part of a song that you didn't necessarily realize would be the beginning.
Yeah, it was sort of what we would call like a floater riff, just like these ideas that feel connected to what we're working on, but we're not really sure where they fit yet.
That's a big part of why we named them, because we have tried like so many different combinations of some of the elements you see here. And some of these names, for instance, they're jokes, but they're also like plays on things, portmanteaus, if you will, smashed together.
Yeah. You do have erudite words.
We've got the best words.
That's right.
Like burbrosis. That's a great word.
That might be what's happening
that
right
is
now.
kind of how that process really happened,
Burbrosis.
especially I would say for this movement.
Burbrosis being like a combination of waifu burbu and Progrosis. What is that? Does that make the cut?
Yeah,
it was Ghost Burb.
We go straight to Ghost Burb. But yeah, it's the chord changes of a part we called Ghost Burb and lead guitar elements from a part we called Progrosis. And so we remember it by, that's Burbrosis.
Oh, yeah, okay, there we go. A synthesis. Pretty Hegelian.
We talk about German idealism in this band a little bit too.
This is a Kantian band.
You do talk about German idealism?
I'm uncomfortable with how plugged into the zeitgeist of this band you are. I'll be honest.
It's pretty. I guess like now's the time. Right?
Yeah, mostly Kant, but we've ventured into other territory. In the first two movements of this particular piece, there's sort of a like botched synthesis towards the end, and then in the third movement, the synthesis it like feels more complete. I think it generally does become more complex. There's definitely certain like rhythmic motifs or like things that we hint at that we then develop later and they become much more complex. But it's a little bit more kind of chaotic and non-linear than that, where it's sort of like you're stepping, it's like Billy Pilgrim in Slaughterhouse-5. It's like you're stepping through a door and you're not sure what time you're going to be in. It's like every time you move into the next musical idea, it's kind of like a step forward, but it's a little surprising. Like you're not 100% sure where you are.
Yeah, precisely. So, for example, after like the early, perhaps like false reassurance of the synthesis in Berberosis, then we get disasterosis, which that's what it says.
Yeah, it's
what happens in like after there's that first synthesis, this disastrous thing occurs. What is that?
I think it's one of the more. I think it's definitely like one of the more like metal or like heavy riffs.
That's the
mosh
album.
Yeah,
that's the mosh riff.
Yeah, because it's got the part where you can start being like
early on.
Oh yeah.
And there's actually a lot going on there, because there's like elements of the song up until that point, but then there's also like a specific, I don't even really want to point out what it is, but there's like a specific like rhythmic pattern that comes in there for the first time that then kind of carries the song and gets voiced in different instruments throughout the rest of the piece. But it's that's the first time it shows up, is sort of just in this like heavy riff. We've also kind of accelerated the tempo for that riff, so it's like picking up steam, but then immediately after that riff is when it gets quite quiet.
Yeah, speaking of different instruments, the flute comes in.
Yeah.
And the flute, I mean, there has been flute on previous...
Yeah, all of it.
On everything, yeah. How did you go about developing the flute parts for this particular song?
That's a good question. I think it really is just like the progression of working with this band and figuring out, like, I don't know, like I've always had the feeling of like this will work. Like I want to like play this instrument in this band, and like over time figuring out how that worked and evolving, like what my tone sounded like, how I played, and what I played through, and like, was it something that we did through the PA? Was it something that we did, just like through a nice, like a normal mic, just on the flute, and then we add studio effects and stuff. I started to look into like, could we actually put it through my amp, and could we like how would that sound? How much feedback would there be? A lot, and would it work? And it did. And so like I was then able to run it through the same effects loop as my guitar, and so I'm just, using, singling out certain pedals, and so I have complete control over my reverb and my delay, and that kind of informed my sound, which then informed very much like how I play.
At what stage did you make that transition?
The first album with that, recording it that way, was Try to Mountain.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I think with this album in particular, like, it's like flute started as something that like, I will say I was like resistant to adding to the band because I couldn't really hear it in my head to like, oh wait, it sounds really good on this one song. And then it's like, well, it sounds good in all these places, but we're like messing around and mixing a lot in post-production to get it to sound the way we want. And then like in writing this, we probably annoyed the hell out of Sam by being like, yeah, what if you put flute on that riff? And he'd just be like, I don't know like what you really want out of that. And we're like, just make it sound good. And then we like recorded it, and honestly, like we manipulated the way the effects sounded a little bit in post-production, and it immediately sounded worse. And we're like, no, it was perfect the first time. And so we just went back to just like the sound of Sam's flute through his amplifiers with his own control of the effects. And it was like exactly what we wanted.
So the first movement ends with a transition where there is improvised drums. What happens between the introduction of the flute and the transition from movement 1 to movement 2?
We definitely, so we sink into this this riff that's sort of the first of what we call the like 4 factorial riffs, which it's taking this particular rhythmic pattern that started in Disasterosis, and Steve is actually playing that on the drums in various places over the what we call the post-rock section. Sort of, honestly, it does sound really kind of generically crescendo core, but
This is the first time we've ever let ourselves do that in like several years of doing this band. Where we're just like, okay, we'll just crescendo chord here.
We always knew at the beginning of the second movement, like even before we had an idea that this would be like this whole long song, we knew that that wouldn't be the beginning of that. Like we knew that was not actually the beginning.
Yeah, we knew we wanted to have an intro, and then that like intro riff or whatever turned into like 13 minutes of music before we get.
I mean, but it is seriously like, let's take the first chord of that first riff, and then okay, what if Sam plays it for a while? What could we put over that? Like I would come in and out on bass, like cutting out at specific intervals. And then I think we tried some more structured drum stuff, and there is like a loose structure to it. Like Steve does very, very similar things, but it's also a little more like free and chaotic.
You wouldn't tell me what you were playing because you wanted me to like be weirder and messier. Yeah. So I was like, "What are you doing, Boone?" And you're like, "Don't worry about it.
Just play.
Just go."
And I think we always knew that this particular movement started with like a certain element of chaos. At least to me, it's always had like a very chaotic sound, and we actually had some disagreement in terms of like how to sequence the tracks because maybe I was the only one unclear, but like it did seem kind of unclear. So like, where does it start, or like where
where does
there
the
is this
transition
element
from movement
of
1 to 2 begin?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I do think it's like a little bit arbitrary.
Yeah,
true.
As much as I really argued for where I thought it should be.
Did you win?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's really.
It was literally like, oh, it's a conceptual thing. I understand.
The second movement has a name, but the name is in IPA. So what is IPA and what is the name?
IPA is the International Phonetic Alphabet. I watch there be some element of that that's not right, but I'm pretty sure it's International Phonetic Alphabet.
Pale ale.
Just an accident of history. I think I just have an arbitrary affinity for dates, and especially years, written in IPA.
So this movement has, its title is a date.
Yes.
Or a year.
1609.
Why 1609 and why 1609 in IPA?
You can play the fifth. It's fine.
You gonna go for it? Or we can leave it out there.
I feel like we should leave it in case someone really wanted to. No, let's just go for it.
It's an Easter egg.
Like it's kind of the time, man.
Yeah,
you know?
1609 is the year that Rabbi Lowe died. And so I actually had originally wanted the title to be 1909.
Okay.
And then Sam had brought up like maybe it should be 1609.
For that reason.
like,
So it
that.
happened in a way dumber way.
Right, yeah, it happened in a way dumber way.
We were trying.
I forgot
trying to
about
set up
this.
clip tracks.
Yeah.
And so like we counted out all the beats of the song.
Okay.
And like and we were like getting up. We were like I think like 15,900. Like it was like 1,500. Like and I was like, oh, it's gonna be some like kind of cool number, right? And like. I forget what it actually came out to. I don't think it was exactly 1609.
We got it wrong, but we thought the first time we made the click track that it was exactly 1600 beats.
Right, and I was just like, man, that number feels important. Like, why does that number feel important? And I was like, that's like around the time that Rabbi Lowe was alive. So I like Wikipedia'd Rabbi We're like 1609 was the year he died. So I was like, we gotta add 9 beats to the song, guys.
Did you?
No.
We're not actually sure.
That click track was really wrong.
It was
we were
wrong.
way off.
So you weren't giving away all of the pet names that you had.
Thank you.
But
You're merciful.
But I will reveal that there are both babies and bananas. What would you say are some of the defining features of the different sections? Whether through explaining them through babies and bananas.
Well, dumb bananas is, I guess, sort of an onomatopoeia.
Dumb bananas.
That's not how
I would think of it more as like a dumb banana nana. In movement 1, they take just the creature that I think of as like the girl from the sea. They take her and take her to their church. The next section is the viewpoint character, protagonist, what have you. Seeing her die by just sort of peeking between two boards on the west wall of the church.
What is it about this second movement that kind of evokes that image or that narrative?
David often makes a joke about riffs sounding like the seniors are coming at you to beat you up, but this section has a lot of those riffs, and so it's like it would scare a small child looking like from between two boards. Like that would be like a traumatic event.
We once played I think it was we've decided the tempos of these riffs like in multiple different iterations. We once played one much too slow, and it just sounded like octogenarians were coming to like.
That's where the joke originates.
Yeah.
Octogenarians, another good word.
Yeah. Tony.
One of the.
But you will find like if you get and digest the like compositional elements and things that are going on, the music does sort of rhyme. You will
Thanks, George.
Oh yeah,
it's like poetry. It rhymes.
Jar Jar is the key to all of this. But, yeah, I mean, like you'll see elements popping up in different incarnations. I think that's probably the closest we'll ever get to like verse, chorus, verse.
Yeah.
Is it like, oh, that riff's back, sort of.
The riff's back, sort of. Nice.
I think that when we were writing it, we knew how we wanted it to continue a little bit. Like we were in, we had a lot of disagreements about how the beginning of what is now Movement 3 should sound, but we had a lot of, we kind of knew the general direction we wanted the song to keep going in, but we were only in agreement up until that like last riff of Movement 2. I think it was basically like we were going on tour and we had just been working on this so much more than we had been practicing songs that we would play, that we kind of thought, well, let's just try to play this section of what we've been working on that feels really coherent on its own. Yeah. And we tried it, and it went pretty good. I remember it was really fun to play. I remember at some point on that tour thinking like, man, maybe we should stop. Yeah, maybe we should finish writing it and stop playing it for now. I think somewhere around Pittsburgh we stopped playing it.
Yeah. And finished writing it?
Well, we didn't. I mean, we finished writing it over the course of the next year plus.
Yeah. How did you eventually discover what is happening right now, which is the transition to Zogan?
I feel like that one. I mean, it took some time, but it was arguably much easier, at least as I recall it, as I remember it. Like, going from 2 to 3 was it still took a lot of work, but in terms of the amount of controversy it generated between us, it was sort of more logical in a lot of ways. Like, we spent a lot of time agonizing over, like, which combination, which sequence of things, what's going to happen for going from 1 to 2. And as I recall, 2 to 3 is like, that sounds pretty right after a few tries.
Sam's guitar part is pretty continuous. Yeah. Like it changes tonally a lot, but in terms of like what he's playing, it's like very similar and flows really easily into the next part. I think the only thing that took us a while was sort of like the details of, okay, what does this next section that we've arrived at sound like? And how does it develop? How does it develop into the other things that we want to hear? What Sam's playing there is like the rhythmic idea that we've brought back a couple times. Yeah. But it's
rhyming.
Complicated, right? That's when you begin playing it sort of forwards and then backwards, right?
Steve does it sometimes too.
Oh yeah, he does.
Variations of it. That was Steve's idea. It was a good idea.
To invert.
Yeah.
The rhythmic pattern in itself is like kind of based around an inversion, but then also like Steve took like the first pattern that I came up with and like inverted that on itself in a way that I think is super cool.
Yeah, I think that idea, I think that's where it gets like kind of fully developed and then put to rest, is in that beginning of Movement 3.
Yeah. The number 4 comes up in your annotation, in your account. So 4 exclamation point.
4 factorial.
The rhythm
4 factorial.
is
Yeah.
like erroneously referred to as 4 factorial. It is not a factorial, but it's kind of like one.
Yeah, it's like I've got a counting down.
Did any of us actually successfully take calculus?
No.
Yeah.
In high school? Yeah.
I mean, I took it pass fail.
So that will tell you all you need to know about our factorial knowledge. But I always really liked that
Greater than mine.
transition because it kind of, the end of 2 is like really, really harsh, and you see that rhythm emerging again there, but it's like it's quite chaotic and quite. Even like it's very unpleasant for me to play,
but painful.
Yeah, I mean it's hard. It's and it has like this really intense dissonance, and you still have that same dissonance, but it's like suddenly pivoted to something much quieter, much more consonant, even much just the context we changed it, and I hope that's always really, good job.
Yeah. How would you describe the the guitar playing that you're doing in the 3rd movement?
In many ways, it's easier. The parts here are like they're light, they're clean, and then except when they're not, but they're still very. They're not particularly busy, right? They're almost. It makes me feel more like a rhythm player.
Both the first 2 movements get to points where they have these resounding, melodramatic, heavy, distorted guitar parts, all of which are kind of doomy in their own ways. And then from that point, they kind of get more dissonant and chaotic, and that's how they end. And in the 3rd movement, when we get to the section that we call half doom, we kind of delay progressing it. We move into what we call full doom, where we slow the tempo down a lot.
The bass becomes synth.
Yeah, on the 2nd iteration of that. So earlier in the movement, there's a part where I lay out, and what I do is I give an input to a synth generator pedal, and then I use a specific settings on a delay to make it kind of like an arpeggiator.
Sure.
And then I mute that loop so that I can bring it back later over this doom riff. What I think that does, and what I think everybody's parts kind of do towards the end of this riff, and then especially when it ends, is it just interrupts it, and it goes to someplace completely different. It gives like a really harsh transition, but as opposed to the first 2 movements where it gets like the transition into the riffs are logical and clean and smooth, but the riffs get more dissonant and chaotic. It's like there's this really harsh interruption, but then the riffs become a lot more softer, or just like less dissonant, easier to listen to.
And so again, when once this music already exists, and then you're like creating the end of the narrative, that seems to fit, I think, with this character declaring that they are shafts of light. Yeah. Which relates to music in turn. Yeah. You were saying.
Well, totally. Like, I mean, I never actually say like the word light. I gets cut off by like I am shafts of, and then I trigger a different effect using the synth, and everybody switches their parts like right at that moment.
That's interrupting.
And I do think like what we were talking about earlier with the way that like you can conceive of like light as the contextualizing force, like the orchid is like the terrestrial force. Like that's this ending to this long song that kind of recontextualizes everything before it, right?
Oh, that's true. Full Doom is pretty earthy.
I mean, another thing I'm thinking about as we sort of talk around this like, this like thing that makes me uncomfortably like sounds uncomfortably to me like sonata form, where we're doing some kind of like Hegelian like theme, second theme, and then they get combined, and like what we talk about in like music theory, music history is that like what that sort of idea, the way that idea like plays out in music tends to be that like the first theme is like this subject, and then the second theme is sort of like an object that like complicates the subject, and then they like wrestle through this development section, and the first theme eventually like wins out and incorporates the object into itself, which I think is nasty and horrible.
Okay.
And when you kind of like play that out on like thinking about kind of like the context of like what's happening in the 19th century, and you think about the context of colonialism and like that kind of thing, like I like find all of that like really troubling. And I think that, you know, this is not something that I like thought about while we were writing this music. This is just something I'm actually just thinking about right now as we talk through this. But I think that, you know, while we have these things that kind of like motion at some of those same shapes, you know, that in many ways are like one of our primary themes, this sort of rhythmic thing that we've been talking about, as Boone mentioned, kind of like disappears after it kind of gets resolved, like at the very beginning of the third movement. Like we kind of really live in it, we play in it, it like does something, but then it disappears, and like that definitely isn't where the resolution of the song is. That's not like where the ending is, and the rest of the song is like everything. I sort of see it as this is like everything else that has become spun out and like created by this by the motion to this moment creates its own like new energy that still has to be dealt with and has to be wrestled with and has to be like and so we have like a whole another 6 minutes of song to go, in which like something gets created that is neither subject nor object but is still part of that, you know, something of that, like an emanation of that wrestling.
Based on how we have described the village to you thus far, the ideas we start adding at the end of the third movement are like complications of that. They only sort of vibe with the parts that you've heard before enough that you'll accept them, but like not so much that they sound like a logical ending point for that song.
Yeah,
we've never talked about that, but it does feel like that musically, stylistically. Like even as we were writing it, there are certain things that feel like, yep, that's like very similar to our previous music. Like I would say that the last sort of, you know, at the end of this doom riff, like what we go into there, to me does not really sound, or has not, it doesn't sound like what a MAETH riff has, you know, meant.
Not just like, in this song, but in general.
Just like that felt, it was very new territory, and I was like really surprised that we were able to just kind of write it as naturally and easily as we did, because it certainly sounds like music that I like to listen to, but it does not sound like music that I'm used to us making as a whole.
That's nice that the end of the final song is new territory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Someone else has to pick it up from here.
You pick up the flute again at the end. What's the relationship between what the flute is doing at the very end and what the flute's been doing elsewhere?
Some of the themes are similar, and I'm also again at the end, like the very end, playing with that same sort of effect on my delay. It's basically just like you turn the like delay, you know, like you turn the delay like repeats like all the way up, and you like, but you make them really spread out, and then you just kind of play things into it, and then you kind of play on top of those things, and you play on top of those things, and it creates this like, and eventually like you totally lose any sense of time, and things start lining up in ways that like you really didn't expect. To me, I guess what it's always felt like is it just feels like that kind of like weird spiraling off effect of like you have no idea what was the original idea or what was the original like thing. Like that any original like thing that you played, and the line between like performer and what was performed before, or like what's being created by an electronic, like all of that is totally blurred, and you just kind of have this like this senseless noise, and I just always thought it was really beautiful, and I was really excited to like kind of get it into a MAETH song, and like, and then at the end, what I'm also like, I screw up all that beautifulness, and to this end is this antithesis, you know, like this is like, you know, like it's this like beautiful thing, you just sit in it and soak in it, but I start like messing with one of the dials on my delay that creates this kind of weird like, what did we call it? Like it's a weird like
you're the DJ.
Yeah, like I'm the DJ.
It's the glitch effect,
like bubbling effect.
Sam, you're the thinking
that keeps
man's
interrupting
Tom
like
Morello.
all of this like beautiful like kind of soundscape. So.
Are you the DJ that's saying net? The noises that you've been making are just kind of slowly fizzing out, and the golem is ceasing to exist.
Just going to rest up in the attic in Prague. You never know when the secret knowledge that Rabbi Lowe may have passed down through generations.
Yeah,
that's
perhaps it will reemerge sometime.
Yeah, from 1609.
That's what you're going to school for.
Bring
right?
the golem back.
Yeah,
I'm going to school to bring the golem back, and then MAETH will come back too. You heard it here first.
1776 will begin again.
And the beginning isn't the beginning, the ending isn't the end. But I think that is the perfect note to end on. And thank you for taking this journey with us. And join us on Sunday, June 24th at MPLS Books.